Welcome to session 29. And in this session, we will also talk about the Daoism teachings and how it impacted the daily life of the Chinese in ancient Chinese societies, and of course, specifically in the circle of the Chinese elites back then. Uh, but then was it really just like an abstract I guess philosophy system, uh, never really down to earth to the commoners or the mass of the Chinese ancient society? Uh, Here's some, I guess, examples I could cite, and you be the judge, right? Um, So we talk about the Chinese herb medicine and the cultural environment that surrounded, which basically produced the Chinese herb medicine, probably traced back before even Taoism as a philosophy. In other words, the cultural environment had always been there, right? So whether or not this was developed and refined, defined by the Chinese elite into a school of philosophy. Um, so I think the Chinese herb medicine could trace back at least about 4 or 5 thousand years. So this was long, long before Taoism came into the formation as a philosophy, right? So now the first, I guess, example I would offer here is the evidence of the healthy lifestyle of the Taoist back then. Basically they aimed at longevity as at least one objective. Apart from living in, I guess, zero distance to Mother Nature, where and when they could. Uh, of course, it was not about affordability. The economic issue is, could you actually, you know, put aside or set aside the things that you already realize as the vanity, so you stop chasing the rainbows and enjoy the life, as it came. Um, that, of course, was the hermit lifestyle. What about the people who probably did not know anything about the Taoism, barely edified by the Taoism teachings? What was the Chinese commoner or the mass? How did they live? And was it really related to the Taoism, teaching in essence? Once again, I'll tell you what I know and share, and then you be the judge. Uh, let's first talk about what they I guess eat every day, 3 meals a day. So that, of course, did not start up the way eventually developed into. When the I guess at least in wartime, when the commoners had to worry about their 3 meals a day, they obviously could not really think about what was healthier than what could just stuff their stomach as the basic needs on the basic level. And with that, uh, at the base of the premise, of course, in time it developed, evolved. I don't know ever revolutionized, but it definitely evolved. So we briefly mentioned before, in the Chinese cuisine, which is unique, from all the other cuisines, from other cultures. The Chinese cuisine, which lasted into the contemporary China or the contemporary Chinese society today, with, of course, something lost then, in between all this westernization transformation process, came through for over a little over a century. But still, uh, most Chinese commoners today, or the Chinese man today, have the knowledge of what would be the food you want to stay away if you want to avoid breakout of any kind, from your body, that you have that problem, right? And then almost everybody knows you don't want to have the radish. The Japanese call it daikon, Chinese call it luobu. That particular kind of vegetable actually would ruin all the other herbs you know boil in your soup, such like a ginseng or a bunch of other specific function intended herbs. Having the radish in the soup would definitely make it I guess defeat the purpose of the other ingredients. So if you have the daikon or radish or lobo in your soup, you don't need to put any other herb, basically supposedly to, aim at a certain effect because that won't happen, right? But the daikon or the radish or lobo by itself actually offers a lot of great functions by itself. So when you boil this soup with either lean pork or even beef, slices, not a whole lot. You don't want a very greasy soup for Chinese herb soups. It actually offers a lot of good effects. For instance, okay, let's set that there. But then also about that was the what you eat, take in as the food. So vegetables and the fruits, they all, each and every one of them, recorded in the Chinese written historical materials archived. Each and every one of them, what's the side effect you want to stay away from, but what's the the function you want to induce through introduction into your daily food, and of course your daily meals change from time to time based on the health condition. Of course, that does not just go alone. You got to have this exercise of enabling the circulation of your positive original energy inside your body system. So when the two go in hand, supposedly you don't even need to see doctors, right? So that's the Chinese food. When we talk about all this delicacy, the artistic taste in the presentation, of course, that wasn't meant for the mass. That was for the royalties, nobilities, and the Chinese elite or the Chinese gentlemen. Basically, they had the time and the, I guess the financial means to afford all that. But for the mass, they at least, it's just a vegetable and fruits back then. It was cost, it was at a cost really affordable. Okay, even when I was a little boy, vegetable, comparing to the red meat, not every household back then in the red China could afford the red meat in daily meals. But vegetable, of course, down to the people at the lowest income at the bottom of the red China, everybody could afford. At least in, I guess, in the urban societies, right? I had absolutely no idea when I was that little about how the Chinese people live in the countryside. Later, I heard a lot of horrible stories, but when I was a little boy in Beijing, I had no idea. But I guess that was just the point. The vegetable was, widely available and affordable to all Chinese, and they had all this common knowledge how to, take what vegetable and fruits in at, for specifically what purpose. And that was, not just, exclusively for, reserved for the uh, royalties, nobilities, and Chinese elites, or even the merchants, who had money, but the lowest social standing at the bottom of the ancient Chinese society, right? So that was about what they used to eat and how they eat, right? And then we were talking about the drink, right? So of course, the tea was, the I guess the drink, uh, symbolically and actually for the Chinese, obviously for the royalty, nobility, and Chinese gentlemen, but could the Chinese mass actually enjoy tea? Well, it really depends on what kinds of tea. Of course, I'm sure if we're talking about the first cut of the tea, life cycle every year, the baby green, that was for the empress reserved, not for other people. But then the later cut, okay, they were not the baby greens, but they're little bigger tea leaves, produced after they were picked off the tea trees or tea shrubs or whatever. Tea trees, this is like about 2 feet tall. Tallest could be like 3 feet, which barely, but around 2 feet tall, pretty much standard. That's my observation. Okay, I didn't grow up on the tea farm, so I don't want to mislead you. But in any case, those tea leaves, picked after May, but before June, they were good. Today, we would probably consider them first class. Of course, the top class, above the first class was the baby green. Back then was for tribute to the royal palace. Nobody were allowed to. Well, if this area was designated as the tribute to the royal, then nobody was allowed to touch it. But of course, there were other places somehow survived from the royal procurement procedures, and then some people could sell it to the either people who could afford, or just use it to bribe. They call it elegant bribery of the high officials, right? So anyway, it was in high demand. But like I said, if it was picked off the tea trees between May and April and June, it was still first class. And after that, it would be like second class and third class as we consider today, because the bigger the tea leaves it gets, came out of the later part of the life cycle, which pretty much stopped at late October, depends which part of China you're in. The later towards the end of the cycle of the year, the bigger the tea leaves and the bitter it gets. And guess what? If you have been drinking third class or even off-grade tea all your life, your taste became accustomed to this bitter, in your mouth, on your tongue, the top of your tongue. And if you have been drinking that, okay, all your life, and the first time you're offered with the baby green, the super, expensive tea, you may not even like it. That's how it works. But in any case, the teas, of course, the green tea first was served the way that the Japanese tea ceremony still, do, which is basically like the green cappuccino. That changed after the ethnic Han Chinese took over, took China back from the Mongols. Everything, I guess, revolutionized. as far as how the tea was appreciated. And of course, the porcelain became so popular, at least in the royal circle, to appreciate the tea. It's no longer the green, cappuccino. The difference here being the tea leaves were being processed rather than in a raw format, only chopped up to serve. That's green tea. And then at the later part of Ming Empire, uh, the black tea, as referred to by the Western, red tea, referred to by the Chinese of the same thing, was actually, semi-baked to baked, a more sophisticated processing procedure. The production actually took about 9 steps initially. Of course, each and every category and subcategory, differentiated, from each other as far as the particular production method and procedure. But in any case, if you have like a 3 pounds of fresh tea leaves, you may produce like 2.5 pounds to 2 pounds of green tea. But all that 3 pound fresh tea leaves, you may not even get a half pound of black tea. So that's why when you make the green tea, you can refill water, hot water, and then basically have the same green tea, refilled with water twice. After the third time, there's no like a taste of tea, or even observe the color of that tea. Nothing left, just dump it. But when it's black tea, of course, it varies, between different subcategories. You could typically, refill water 7, 8 times or even more, and still, taste like tea rather than the plain water. Yeah. So that's because it's more compressed. But all that, let's come back to drinking the tea. So even if you are, let's say, a commoner back then in ancient Chinese society, the off grade or third class, it was affordable. So why people want to drink tea? One, of course, the tea is a kind of culture, when friends, it was in my times even, okay, this was like a Red Republic. It's not even like the Manchurian Empire or something. It was absolutely rude when you have any visitors call on your home and you just stand there and talk to them by the door, like we do here in America today. Not in China. That was extremely rude. Okay, you would be criticized by everybody if you do that. So you would obviously first say, "Oh, let's don't just stand here and talk. Let's go into the house and sit down for a cup of tea and let's talk over the tea." So it doesn't matter what the subject is, you got to offer the tea in the Chinese household. We have the visitors, right? Especially around Beijing. That's how I grew up. So even to the day, if people come in, I have got to ask, what can I offer? That's just how I grew up. So that was that. But that was for the social part of it. But then actually there's health part of it. Because the Chinese believe after you have a great meal, a lot of meat, you need the tea to digest all that grease and stuff. Otherwise, it won't be, I guess, healthy. And when you have seafood, even this, in the contemporary China, people know, you need to have some kind of liquor to go with the seafood, because seafood is considered cold as versus hot, but that had nothing to do with the temperature. We're purely talking about the yin-yang system, okay? So when you have that seafood, you gotta have the liquor to go with it, or at least wine, okay? The Chinese rice wine, or which is yellow, or the Japanese sake, which is transparent. The cold sake, of course, is white, uh, uh, murky thing. So that's about the drink, right? And then how about the clothes? The Chinese, remember, in the traditional Chinese culture, because of the Confucianism, the Chinese never, you know, uh, I guess, hold the violence or the anything to do with violence in high regard. So, the military never had the high social standing, even at the same, royal court ranking. They were actually regarded, sub to the civil officials. Um, so because of that, the Chinese clothing was by design always very loose. Why? Because the ancient Chinese believe if your clothes is designed too, tight cut, right, around your body, like the Western Europe or the European, actually no, not Western back then. It was European clothing design. It's not healthy, or it was not healthy because it was not allowing the free circulation of the positive, original energy inside your body. It becomes kind of constraints, for the natural circulation, and that's why the Chinese always have the big robes, right? And so make sure it's loose, it's really loose. I remember my Manchurian Banner member grandfather on my mother's side. All his life, all he what he wore, his pants. I think with that clothes, that cloth, we could probably make, two T-shirts or one big shirt today, for a big guy, or two shirts for a, smaller guy. Because basically what it was just, two big bags, So what did they do? They didn't have the contemporary sense of belt, leather belt. It was all cloth, made, basically, kind of, well, I want to say about 3 feet long, wrap around. Okay, they're very loose pants around their waist. So that becomes some kind of protection too in the meantime. And they also use, cloths to wrap around, their ankles. Okay, so that way when they walk around, it's really loose. Nothing is so tight cut. So who else wore that? I remember my, I guess, kung fu master. All his life he wore that too. Of course, the upper side is the top is what I'm wearing today. I guess in honor of my master. But the pants, I don't wear what my grandfather on my mother's side or my kung fu master. I don't wear what they wore because that's just not practical today, because we do a lot of things today, as versus back then. You only do exercises, when you need to. Otherwise, you're sitting in your house or something. But anyway, today people do more sports and whatever. So I don't wear that anymore. I do have that here, but I guess one day I will try them. But I've had them for like 20 years. I never even tried it once. Of course, those things never go out of fashion, and Chinese did not care fashion of that part. Of course, they always had fashion, things about the accessories here and there, and of course that was for the people have their I guess upper social standing and still chasing the vanities. Yeah, but if you are a Taoist or you're just a commoner, you don't really care. The same thing you wear all your life. Every time you make a new one, just exactly the same replication from the last one. Same color, same cloth, same style, same everything. So I guess back then it was a pretty economic to be a Chinese. At least that's what I perceive as. I don't really know. Of course, another fact was if you're just a commoner, even though let's say you are rich, being a merchant, right? You got a good business. You are not allowed to wear silk. You wore the cotton, as the criminal law actually guides. You don't follow the rule, the law, you go to jail for it. So we talk about what you eat, what you drink, and what and how you wear them. All that, as a commoner in the Chinese, ancient Chinese society, all that actually you can relate to the Daoism teaching. Exactly. So that was down to earth in people's daily life, day in, day out. So it is totally different today when you talk about the Daoism teaching, whereas in a contemporary Chinese life, daily life routines, some still there, but most not. So it's even for a contemporary Chinese today who are Chinese illiterate, right? Read and speak Chinese, but that's contemporary Chinese. It is not classical Chinese. So they cannot appreciate the ancient Chinese literature or philosophy. And in their life, it's less relevant. So it's a lot more, I guess, difficult or challenge for them to comprehend as the ancient Chinese used to. So that wraps up this session about the Daoism teaching and its impact in ancient Chinese society in the daily life routines. Until next section, ciao.